Welcome to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton. He's locked, loaded, and ready to fire. Lawton Online starts right now.
Hello and welcome to you. This is Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. My name's Andrew Lawton, and it is such a pleasure to have you joining me today. We've got a great show up ahead for you, and you know what? This is probably going to be the most feel-good episode of the podcast we've ever had. And the reason I say that, as you'll hear in just a moment, I'm going to get to that in a moment, actually. I'll tell you what's coming up later on. Going to be chatting later on in the program about a former aide to Ontario Premier Dalton McGuinty that wants to ban smoking, make cigarettes completely illegal. We'll be talking about that later on and juxtaposing it with other decisions made by, for example, the Calgary City Council, made by the Ontario government, made by the new Alberta provincial government, and lots more coming up about the war on smoking. Going to be chatting later on in the show as well about a really, really shameful case of a 19-year-old boy, young man, whatever you want to call him, who will be on the sex offender registry for 25 years because he had sex, consensual sex, with a teenager who lied about her age. That's coming up shortly as well. And coming up in the next segment, we're going to be chatting with Dr. Brian Day, a man in the running to be the next head of Doctors of BC, wants to dramatically transform the way healthcare is delivered in Canada into a model that has private alternatives. So we'll be chatting with Dr. Day just after the next break here. But to kick off, I promised you a feel-good show. And I will deliver on that promise, because today we know in 2015, in the month of June, in the great nation that is Canada, in the great nation to the south of us that is the United States, you can be anything you want to be. It's like Journey once sang, any way you want it, you got it. I mean, I realized that was about something else entirely, and all the, Journey fan out there, all of one of you is probably upset that I misappropriated the lyrics, but if you want to be a woman, you can be a woman. If you want to be a man, you can be a man. And if you want to be an African-American, well, I'll be damned if I can tell you you can't. I'm talking, of course, about the late, great Rachel Dolezal, my favorite president of an NAACP chapter anywhere in the world, because how can you not love this woman? How can you not love what this woman represents? She has inadvertently sent the left into a tailspin as they try to drastically and dramatically and swiftly come up with excuses why she is not indicative of other people. They have to condemn her actions without condemning people like Caitlyn Jenner, without condemning other advocates of the transgender movement, which is, contrary to what the left is trying to tell you this week, exactly the same as the now burgeoning transracial movement. They are the one and the same. And I think it is wonderful. I think it's beautiful. It's further proof of what I think a lot of people have been trying to warn for quite a while, which is that all that matters is what's inside. All that matters is what's on the inside that counts. You cannot be defined by your biological sex. You cannot be defined by your ethnicity or your race. I'd argue that we need to be looking at rights for trans species people, or not people, I guess, later on. I mean, after all, what happens if you want to wake up and say you're a squirrel? There's a meme going around with a picture of a little cute dog and the caption that says, "This is Caitlyn Jenner's cat." There's also a great meme going around the internet of NBC's Brian Williams saying, "I'm Brian Williams and I am Rachel Dolezal's black father." I think if that doesn't encapsulate the the big questions I have about this, nothing else does. And look, I realize that Ms. Dolezal's case is complex because there is so much deception coming to light. There are examples of what most people would argue is improper and inappropriate. And understandably so. It's looking like she's lied on government forms. There was this nonsense with her trying to sue Howard University for racial discrimination against her. That was back when she was white. There's been her ongoing series of interviews in which she has furthered and doubled down and tripled down on comments and grossly made, I don't mean disgustingly, but in a vast and grand way, made this story so much bigger than it was even a few days ago. Now we know she has a sex tape that she was made to do, and we know that now she's trying to be a birther. She's saying there's no biological proof that her parents are her parents, and so she's trying to really dig her way out of the hole, but in actuality, I think with every interview, she gets further and further down there. So as a person, I think we can safely say, transracial or not, she is crazy. Now, maybe that's racist. I don't know if you criticize Rachel Dolezal if you're racist now. This is an important question because, you criticize President Obama. No matter what the criticism, you're racist. So I don't know if you're trans racist, if you criticize a transracial person, just run-of-the-mill racist, or if she's fair game. That I don't know. This is the former president of the Spokane NAACP, who initially was standing by her and has now accepted her resignation, as you know by now. But what's interesting is that she's trying to bring this into the metaphysical, which is very interesting. She was on NBC. They asked, have you ever lied about your race? She said she's never been asked, are you human or not human? Which, according to Salon, which did hit the nail on the head on this one, said is a bit odd because humanity is a species, not a race. She said if she'd ever been asked, she'd reply that race is a construct, and she has a fluid understanding. And that's true. There is fluidity to race. For example, you can be mixed race. And I think race and culture are separate from one another. There are certain demographic realities about race. There are certain biological realities about race. But by and large, someone can be born into a black family on the Upper East Side and not behave the same as a black family born and raised in inner city Detroit would. If inner city Detroit had black families that weren't impacted by a lot of the problems that a lot of the inner cities have dealt with. Single-parent homes, drugs, alcohol abuse, poverty, etc., gang connections. So the black experience is not a universal one, I'd argue. And I think most other black commentators have said something very similar. So, curling your hair and getting $1,000 weave does not make you black. No different than Caitlyn Jenner's breast implants make her or him a woman if you're looking at it through the lens of collective experience, things that women experience. My friend Kira Davis, blogger and commentator, she's been a guest on The Blaze, she's been a guest on Dr. Phil of all places. She wrote a piece that went viral. Many people directed their ire towards her, saying basically, look, I can never accept Caitlyn Jenner as a woman because Caitlyn Jenner has never experienced the things that I have. Things like puberty, things like uncertainty, things like your first period. I mean, these are not things that define womanhood, but they're a part of it. And the fact is, Dolezal has done something very similar, which is, for the vast majority of her life, existed as a white woman. And then at one point, maybe 10 years ago or so, I've seen varying dates, decided, you know what, I'm actually a black woman. And she's rewriting history in some ways on this because she's saying that, as a 5 or 6-year-old, she always used to draw herself as black. She'd reach for the brown crayon instead of the peach crayon. And her parents have since said, well, that's not true. So I don't know what the issue with the parents is. I don't know nor care about them. I care about Rachel. Because whether or not she knows it, she has forced everyone in America to take a side on her issue. Whether or not you can be transracial. But she also, and I don't think she knows this, I don't think she cares per se, because I think her priority is herself. After all, there is even a reality show auction war going on here. 2 different production companies at least are trying to compete over who gets the reality rights to option what she's doing. But the reality is, how is a transracial person any different from a transgender person? And my approach to both would be the same. My answer to both would be the same. If, I had a metaphorical son, and they came to me and said, Daddy, I'd like to be a girl, I'd say, well, that's a tough one. I mean, I don't want to get into the whole parenting angle here, but if someone had come to me and said that, I'd say, great, be who you are, have fun, but be prepared that some people are not going to like it. Same as transracial. If someone said, I want to go around in blackface, I'd be like, all right, if you're doing it because you feel you are black, then you have to be seriously prepared at what's going to happen. But if that's who you are, go wild. And Dolezal pulled that off for a while. She was convincing. I don't know if people at the NAACP were aware. I don't know if she had any friends that were aware. I don't know if maybe she herself believed it. But I do know that if we as society have paved the road that you are unable to challenge someone's self-described and self-determined identity, then there is absolutely no grounding whatsoever in those trying to deny Dolezal the right to make that decision for herself. I mean, my response is a very simple one to this. Don't hate the player, hate the game. You have created the rules. The left created these rules. And the fact is, there are any number of beliefs that people have, values that people have. In most cases, these are things you express by speaking. In this case, it's something that she expresses by getting a spray-on tan, by doing her hair differently, by defining what to her blackhood is supposed to look like. And I don't even like that word blackhood, but I can't think of a better word for it. Blackness, blackhood, whatever the case may be. This is to her what it looks like. She doesn't speak any differently than any other person would. But what's interesting is that she's also rewritten her past as well. And this is where she becomes very difficult to sympathize with. And to be clear, I don't think anyone owes her sympathy. But when she starts talking about having referred to her, black father, well, she said that's her dad, but it's not actually her father. She referred in other things, and this was actually brought to the forefront by Ben Shapiro's Truth Revolt. Apparently, she wanted to lead a boycott on, I can't make this up, white actors playing black roles in movies. She wanted to boycott them. She, a white woman playing a black character in real life, wanted to boycott film producers that do that. There was another thing that also was brought up by Ben Shapiro's Truth Revolt, which is how she apparently thinks that her fictional black dad was fending off assassination attempts by racist Marines. I don't even think that's worth discussing because, well, there's no truth to it whatsoever. So, look, I think that we're dealing with a very tricky territory here. But when people start highlighting on her deception instead of the actual story itself and the implications of it, I bring it back to this, I think anyway, rather simple point. I bring it back to this. Imagine if a transgender woman, so a biological male who identifies as a woman, had been working with a women's group for 10 years, had been working anywhere for 10 years, telling everyone that they were a woman, telling everyone that they were a female, talking about their experiences as a little girl, doing this, not identifying that they were in fact a trans female, but saying they were a real female. No one in the media would dare to criticize them because they'd say that's their right. They were afraid of discrimination that would potentially befall them for being a transgender individual. I see Dolezal as being in the same boat. She was afraid of the discrimination that could follow, the discrimination that could ensue if it was known that she was actually transracial instead of just a racial minority. So I don't think these are all that different. And I keep focusing on Caitlyn Jenner. I feel bad because this has nothing to do with Jenner personally, but it has a lot to do with the discussion that has propped up in media and across the world, certainly here in Canada, because of Jenner. And Jenner is a high-profile example of this. And there are others, absolutely. It's not just that case that matters. But I think that has certainly galvanized and painted this in a new light. And what I find interesting, I realize this is an aside here, is how quickly the left then tried to move to distance themselves from Jenner. The radical left on this saying, well, okay, we'll celebrate Jenner, but you should know that's not how transgender people always are. In a lot of cases, they're not glamorized. In a lot of cases, they can't afford to look like that. And my whole thing, and I would say the same to Miss Dolezal. I'd say the same to Miss Jenner. If your identity is all about who you are on the inside, why does the outside even matter? Why do you need to get breast implants? Why do you need to do your hair in what you think is a black way? Why do you need to wear a dress? Why do you need to wax your legs? Why can you not just live saying, you know what, I feel like a woman? And this is the problem with a lot of the gender fluidity advocates. And I don't claim to understand everything about the issue, no. And my rule is a very libertarian one here. Live your life how you want to. It's not my business. My business with anything is with A, what I choose to do with my own life and my own body, and B, what I have to pay for. So if I have to pay for stuff that other people are doing, that's when I start to get concerned with it. But you know what? If you want to go and wear a dress, that's fine with me. If you want to be black, that's fine with me. Might not be fine with a lot of black people, but I personally don't care. And you know what? I think curiosity would probably prevent me from avoiding the Dolezal reality show when it eventually does come. I'll watch, one episode here and there. I might even watch an episode of the Jenner reality show that's on its way down at all. So I say that to lead up to this point here, which I think needs to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest takeaway, which is that, as the old adage goes, your right to extend your rights and freedoms exists until mine begin. And I know that's a paraphrase, but that's the reality here. And it's amazing how much identity politics plays into every discussion now that takes place about virtually any issue. It's not about your own rights and freedoms. It's not about your own abilities. It's not about what's good for society. It's about absolute sexual freedom and bodily freedom, not juxtaposed with anything else. And Bill Gardner writes about this, Dr. Bill Gardner, in his latest book, The Great Divide, Why Liberals and Conservatives Will Never Ever Agree. And I am more of a libertarian than he is. And it's weird, I don't even identify as a libertarian, but I realize that I have that streak in me. But the reason that I think that's important to note here is because I recognize that a lot of the people that are pushing for the sexual freedoms, and I include transgender in that, and for the purposes of this discussion, I'll have to include transracial, but bodily freedoms, I guess, is a better way of putting it, are people that don't actually care about freedom in general. They don't actually care about the general fight for freedom. They care about the ability to do what they want with their own bodies. And with that, though, comes a forced acceptance that they want by everyone else. And Dolezal is in a very similar boat. She didn't just want to, in her mind, say, you know what, I think I'm black. I like black culture. I like black experiences. She wanted everyone to accept her as black. And what better way to do that than working at the frigging NAACP? I mean, if you're going to do it, go big or go home. She went right into the lion's den. And for years, she succeeded. It was only her parents that doubted her. Which means that she's a pretty darn good liar, or her colleagues actually knew and had accepted her as black. I doubt that, but you never know. But when we're looking at the transgender question, which is, I think, a very, very important question, it's one of the biggest civil rights movements of 2015. There are examples every single day of somewhere in North America where someone's right who is, by their own admission, trans, is somehow stepped upon. Whether it's they wanted to use the opposite sex's bathroom, whether they want to have sex taken off birth certificates, whether they want the government to pay for the surgery from one sex to the other, whatever the case may be. This is the issue that dominates the news cycle this year. And this is going to last for more than a couple of years. This is the new gay rights battle. And I don't know why my position is not more widely adopted, which is do what you want. I will, as an individual, accept you. I will, as an individual, say, you're a good person. Or you're not. I mean, not everyone's a good person. But I don't need to celebrate you. And that's true of anything. I don't really celebrate any identity. I try to celebrate people as individuals. And this is, I think, the big breaking point here. I don't need to celebrate Bruce Jenner coming out as Caitlyn Jenner. I can celebrate Bruce Jenner as an athlete. If Caitlyn Jenner runs a marathon now, I can celebrate Caitlyn Jenner as an athlete. I can celebrate Bruce Jenner as a father. I can celebrate Caitlyn Jenner as a mother or father. I still don't quite understand the protocol. Rachel Dolezal. I can celebrate her as an activist if I wanted to. I could celebrate her as a mother if I wanted to. I can denounce her as a liar, but I don't think her race matters. And people who are concerned with race, people who are concerned with gender, people who are concerned about all of these things are people who, despite fighting on the surface for progress, are people who define themselves and clearly define others by nothing other than their identity group, their victim group. Whether it's a racial minority, whether it is a sexual minority, whether it is a so-called gender minority, even though they're at parity in society in women. Same thing. Be who you are. Like Lady Gaga says, embrace your inner self and spread your wings and whatever other BS goes along with that. But let's not deceive ourselves into thinking that Ms. Dolezal and Ms. Jenner are any different. No, they're people that felt their bodies and their lives were different from one another. Their identities and their biology not the same. That's fine. That's their decision to make, not mine. But they are, in fact, the same. More of Lawton Online is coming up in just a moment here on TheRebel.media. I'm Andrew Lawton. Stay tuned.
He's unapologetic, unwavering, and unafraid to take on the left's sacred cows. He's Andrew Lawton, and you're listening to Lawton Online on TheRebel.media.
Welcome back to Lawton Online. I wanted to speak for a little bit on this program about healthcare policy. And I know that public policy is typically not the most sexy of topics, but at the same time, I'm also talking to fellow rebels. So I know that of anyone in Canada that I could talk to that would get it, it's you guys. So bear with me here. Because in British Columbia, not my province, I've been there, it's a beautiful place, there is a battle underway, an election you may not have heard of. And it's the election for who will take over Doctors of BC, the BC Medical Association, basically. And the two candidates are not just running based on a popularity contest, but with very different visions for healthcare in British Columbia and by extension healthcare in Canada. Dr. Alan Rudiman is running, and he wants to support, improve, and bolster the public system. He thinks universal health care is birthright, basically. And Dr. Brian Day, on the other hand, operates a chain of surgery centers that are privately funded. He cannot legally deal with the general population, but he can deal with workplace injuries. There's no wait list. He's an orthopedic surgeon and a businessman as well, and he wants there to be private alternatives. He wants patients to have choice. And this is an election that has been framed as public versus two-tiered or private. Now, what's interesting is that when asked about that, both Dr. Rudiman and Dr. Day both said that's not what it's about. Dr. Rudiman says, no, it's not an accurate description. If society chooses to have a different relationship in the way in which physicians are funded for the services, then the medical association would yield to the law of the day. Dr. Day said, I absolutely disagree. If people had respected apartheid laws stating abortion was illegal or homosexuality was illegal, where would we be? It's our duty as advocates for patients to change laws that prohibit patients from getting access. We want a good system, but the type that exists in other social democracies, like in France, Belgium, Germany, and Austria, where there is a small component on non-government healthcare, not a government monopoly, that treats patients as though they are to be governed and not part of a collaborative situation. And I think that line, above all else, speaks to the big problem of the healthcare system in Canada, is that patients are expected to go along with it, and patients don't really have their own ability to choose, to go outside the system. And I think people frame this as a Canada versus U.S. thing, which is a tad disingenuous as well. I think we should be looking at the failings of both systems and say, let's create a system that is unique to Canada that works for Canada. But you can't do that when no one is prepared to tackle the problems of the system we have, no one at the provincial level of government or at the federal level of government, which is why a doctor leading to Campaign a Medical Association, by the way, a doctor who in Dr. Day was formerly the head of the Canadian Medical Association, is pushing for this. So I had the opportunity on my radio show on AM 980 in London this week to talk with Dr. Day about this, and I wanted to share a section of that interview here with you because I think he has some ideas that would not only transform but also reform healthcare to a much better place than it is today. Dr. Brian Day, it's great to have you on the program, sir. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
So let's first off talk about what makes you unique as a physician, given the facility you operate in British Columbia, because I don't think a lot of people necessarily understand that these facilities even exist.
Right. Well, this story all began in the late 80s. The Canada Health Act came in 1984, and by the end of that decade, wait lists started to rise dramatically, and doctors and surgeons couldn't get access for their patients because with the fixed funding formula that Canadian governments introduced, whereby physician and hospital services were only to be government funded, when they started to run out of money, the only thing they could do was cut back on access. And so by the early 90s, I was in charge of training orthopedic surgeons in British Columbia education-wise, and I was chairman of the Royal College Committee for credentialing orthopedic surgeons in Canada. And we found that of just in BC, of 16 trainees over a 5-year period, only 5 were left in Canada because they couldn't get a job, and now it's worsened to the state that in 2015 there are 178 unemployed orthopedic surgeons in Canada, and yet the biggest wait lists and the hardest surgeons to see for an opinion and treatment are orthopedic surgeons. So this is a bizarre phenomenon. I mean, it's simply incredulous to people outside of Canada, where, of course, in countries that have universal health care with no wait lists, as in Europe, there is a hybrid mixed system that works. And we all know from the past that when you have a monopoly provider of a service, that the consumer, and in this case the patient, is the last to benefit when you start, and especially, so all monopolies are bad, private or public, but we're now faced with a bureaucracy that's grown to a point that it's incredible. We have in Canada 14 ministers of health for a population half that of France, and they have one minister of health. They have no wait lists in their public system. They have far fewer bureaucrats operating within the system on the public payroll. In Germany, which has no wait list and a hybrid system, they have universal health care, no wait list for the public system. But Canada has 11 bureaucrats on the public payroll for every one that Germany has on the public payroll on a per capita basis. So all we've achieved here is the growth of a massive bureaucracy, and patients are suffering.
Is the problem then the actual system itself, which is of universal single-payer healthcare, or is the problem simply Canada's execution of it?
Well, it's both. I mean, there is no country on earth, and Canadians need to understand this. There is no country on earth that operates with a single payer system. We don't have or see a single payer system in any of the social democracies in Europe, like Sweden and Denmark and Holland, countries that have social programs that in many cases exceed ours. We don't see them even in communist countries like China and Cuba and North Korea and Laos, Vietnam. None of these countries outlaws the right of a citizen to buy private health insurance to back up their health system. We allow it for certain things like dentistry and drugs and physiotherapy, but it's still something that sets us apart from every other country. And in fact, within the country, it's illegal to buy private insurance in most provinces in Canada. And Ontario actually has the most draconian legislation of all. If a patient in Ontario is found to be, quote, jumping the queue, even if that involves them paying to get their own knee fixed, they are subject to a $20,000 fine. Now, there is no country on earth, even the former Soviet Union wouldn't have laws like that. But we Canadians seem to accept government control and authority over our bodies in a way that no other country on earth does.
Now, how are things different in British Columbia that allow you to have a private surgery center, or several actually, for orthopedic surgeries?
Well, we opened right in the middle of a 10-year rule of the NDP in BC. So it was a pretty brave thing to do. But we did it because we were losing surgeons, so we had nowhere to do our surgery. My OR time was progressively cut back at the University Hospital from 22 hours a week down to 5 hours a week, and I had 450 patients waiting for surgery. So we decided to build our own place, and the way we got around the politics of it is we targeted injured workers. So actually, workers' compensation patients in British Columbia, who, interestingly, were mostly unionized workers, were those who were exempted. They are exempt from the laws that prohibit non-workers or people who aren't injured on the job, and they were the mainstay of our work early on. And then then we basically went further and decided that if an injured worker who hurts his knee or shoulder on the job is entitled to this, surely you cannot deny a young kid who's playing rugby or hockey or soccer a similar privilege under the law. And we decided that the government was acting unconstitutionally here. So we flaunted the laws on the basis that they were unconstitutional, just in the way that in recent years same-sex marriage, homosexuality, abortion, those kinds of things have also been shown, even though there were laws saying that abortion was illegal. When it went to a constitutional Charter of Rights argument, those laws were struck down. And that's what we're doing right now. We have actually gone to court. When I say we had six plaintiffs, patients who suffered under the health system. Sadly, since we launched our suit in 2009, two of the plaintiffs with cancer have died.
Wow.
And one of the remaining patients also has cancer. One of our most, if you like, one of the patients that we have who's gone to court with us is very, very symbolic of a tragic result, and that is an 18-year-old boy who waited 27 months to get into the BC Children's Hospital for a major spine operation and has ended up paralyzed for life. This kid was playing football and riding his bike when he started on the wait list, And this could not happen in any other developed country on earth.
I have to ask about that weight-related question here, just so people can understand the practical implications of it. If you have a non-emergency referral that you have towards an orthopedic surgeon in the public system, what are people looking at weight-wise there compared to if someone were to call up your clinic and go that route?
Well, there is no wait list at our clinic.
Wow.
And there is no wait list for an injured worker in British Columbia either. So we don't need to theorize on what might happen. We have to look at what happens in countries like Belgium and Austria and Switzerland and in our own provinces for injured workers. And see, they don't have a wait list. An injured worker gets an MRI right away, gets surgery right away. It should be like that for everyone. And this is not about privatizing the system. This is about making the public system work better. In the countries that I mentioned in Europe and in countries like Singapore, in the public system, there are no wait lists. This red herring of jumping the queue is nonsense because there are no queues to jump. The difference between those with private insurance, which, by the way, in many countries costs $100 a month. This is not a major. It's not like the American system, which, recently the Commonwealth Fund did a ranking of 11 developed countries. We came in 10th out of 11. The United States came in 11th. So it's not about that. It's about making the public system work better. And the difference between a private hospital and a public hospital in France isn't who gets quicker treatment, or in Germany or in Austria or Belgium. It's maybe a nicer room, maybe a glass of wine with dinner, that kind of thing. Nothing to do with access to healthcare, which is what Canadians are lacking under the monopoly. As I say, I don't know a single monopoly in any area of service that serves the consumer well. And what we have in Canada for physician and hospital services is a government-run monopoly.
We're just about out of time. Dr. Brian Day joins me on the line. I was wondering if you could just give a brief update as to the status of the Doctors of BC election.
Oh yes, I will. We will know the outcome on this Friday. This Friday the outcome will be announced as to and my goal is to try and influence government policy to make the public system work the way it should. The way that, actually, this sounds strange, but the way Tommy Douglas thought it should. Tommy Douglas never meant, to outlaw a citizen's right to spend their own money on their own health. He wanted a health system that provided good basic care in a timely manner for everyone, and that's not being provided in the current system.
That was Dr. Brian Day speaking to me earlier this week on AM 980 in London. Great thoughts. Would love to hear what you think about that. You can email me at andrew@andrewlawton.ca, andrew@andrewlawton.ca. We'll be right back after the break with more Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. Stay with us.
You're listening to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton, exclusively on TheRebel.media. Email your thoughts to Andrew at andrewlawton.ca or tweet Andrew using @AndrewLawton.
Hey, welcome back to TheRebel.media. I'm Andrew Lawton, and this is Lawton Online. And I wanted to talk about this really weird case. I don't even think it's that weird, because the more I've looked into it and talked to other people about it, it is shockingly all too common. Although this one has a slight caveat that I think makes it a bit more concerning. And I was researching and doing something else, and I came across this story this week. And what I did is I posted it to Facebook, which is basically what I do internally for things I want to revisit later and look in a bit more detail on sometimes. I mean, not with cat videos and stuff, but with serious stuff. And I went back, I think it was like 30 minutes or an hour later, and I saw what I think is tantamount to digital bloodshed. You know, friends, family, fans, listeners, all beating each other, yelling at each other, very impassioned about this. And understandably so. It has galvanized a lot of people. It's about a 19-year-old boy or a 19-year-old young man. The wording matters. It depends on how you see him, and that depends on how you interpret this case. His name is Zachary Anderson. He's from a town in Indiana, near the Michigan-Indiana border. And like many 19-year-old boys, he had his mind on sex not long ago. He was using an app on his phone, and he met someone else who was looking for the same thing, a 17-year-old girl from Niles, Michigan, very close to the Indiana-Michigan border. Apparently, they're about 20 minutes away from each other. They decided to get together. I don't know the details of the encounter, but they did have sex, and it happened one time. The girl's mother was worried her daughter had gone missing and called the police. They ended up tracking this down. As it turned out, the girl was not actually 17, as she had said to him verbally, as she had said in her profile. The girl was actually 14. So as a result, Zachary Anderson was arrested, booked, has now been convicted after pleading guilty, thinking that he would get a lenient sentence, and is on the sex offender registry for 25 years. 25 years. He's serving 90 days in jail. He's about a few days away from the halfway point. And I'm going to play a clip from a newscast on WSBT in Elkhart, Indiana, because there's a lot of details in this that I want you to get from the source, including some of the comments from the family. But more importantly, I want you to listen to the comments from the alleged victim's family.
WSBT 22's Zach Crenshaw spoke with both families today, and they want the same thing. Zach?
Yeah, they want Zachary Anderson out of jail and his sentencing changed. Anderson's family says state law allows for a less severe punishment because their son is under 21. The judge, though, chose not to show that leniency. For the Anderson family, one night changed their lives.
He honestly thought he was meeting a 17-year-old girl.
Instead, their second oldest son, Zach, met a 14-year-old who had lied about her age in an app. The two met and had sex. Police found out because the girl's mother, who I spoke to on the phone, was worried she'd gone missing.
He's not done anything that my daughter didn't do.
But it's Les and Amanda Anderson who can only see their child on a monitor when they visit him in jail.
We were probably looking at 40 days and not to be able to, to just wrap your arms around your kid and say, I love you and give him a hug. That hurts.
40 days ago, Zach pleaded guilty with the hope of being granted a status available to under 21-year-olds. But he wasn't.
He can't talk to anybody under the age of 17 for 5 years, except for his brothers. He can't reside in a home that has internet or internet access or smartphone use. This is for 5 years.
The 14-year-old and her mother both asked the judge for leniency.
More than that, we told him to drop the case, and he wouldn't do it.
The current sentence greatly ruined and altered his life.
The Andersons know what their son did was wrong, but the two and many others don't think the punishment fits the crime.
I think the shirt says it simple, give his life back, because it's for Zach, we want him to be able to be a normal 19-year-old.
Now, the Andersons say if this situation had played out in Elkhart instead of Niles, their son would probably not be in jail. That's because Indiana is one of 20 states that says if a victim lies about their age, that fact can be used as a legal defense.
Zach, so what's next for this family?
Well, they plan to file an appeal soon, Jennifer, and hope to get Zach that status I mentioned earlier that would remove this incident from his record and lessen the future impact on his life.
And that was from WSBT in Elkhart, Indiana, where Zachary Anderson was from. And I feel very bad for him. And I know a lot of the social conservatives out there, of which I'm one when it comes to people's individual choices, will be like, well, the answer is, don't meet people and hook up with them on apps. And yet, in theory, I think that's right. And I think both Anderson and the victim should learn a valuable lesson from this. Well, maybe you don't just pick up a random stranger online and find them. You never know. And I would say to the 14-year-old, how do you know that the person who comes over isn't going to be a rapist? How do you know they're not going to be someone who wants to hurt you, especially if you are 14 and probably not able to defend yourself as well as someone who's a bit bigger or older would? But that's besides the point. What matters now is that the victimless crime has been made bad only because of an activist judge. And now you have Zach Anderson, even if they can get the leniency on the sentence, which is afforded to criminals under 21 in this particular type of case, even if he gets that, his name will be forever linked to this situation. His name will be forever tied to this. I mean, thank goodness Zachary Anderson is a common enough name that I'm sure when you Google it, other stuff might come up instead. But even when you have not that I think the victims, I don't even like calling her victims, not that I think the girls' parents should necessarily have a say. Like if they were saying, chop his thing off and, send him to the gallows, I would say, okay, come on, people. But the fact that even the family of who the court sees as the victim in this case is saying drop the charges, I think tells us that maybe, just maybe, and by that I mean certainly, the judge is overstepping his bounds here. Now, Lenore Skenazy at Reason.com wrote about this, and she shared some details about the judge that I think should tell us some of the problems here. Apparently, he once sent a woman to jail for 10 days because she swore when she was paying a parking ticket that she got, or something really ridiculous like that. And I don't know what the answer to this is, because I will say Canada seems to have approach these matters with a bit more common sense. I mean, just as I don't think that a teenager who sends a naked picture of themselves to another teenager should result in child pornography charges, that's basically where we've gone to on this. We've moved towards a system that tries to find the victim in everything. It doesn't matter if the 14-year-old's saying, look, I lied, I made a mistake, I did something wrong. No, still, there's a man whose life is ruined. The only victim of this is Anderson himself, and he's not a victim of another person. He's a victim of the justice system. Justice in quotation marks. And it's interesting. I think this is a fascinating example of how parents can come together and reach what essentially amounts to a conclusion. Yes, we're sorry our son did this to your daughter. Hey, we're sorry our daughter did this to your son. No, my son shouldn't have been trolling for action among a 17-year-old anyway. And oh, no, my daughter shouldn't have been lying about her age. Okay, we've agreed to this. We've settled this like adults. We're sorry. See you at Christmas. No. Instead, this has to become a police matter, and the fact that the mother of the girl regrets bringing police into it, I think, speaks volumes about this case. Volumes about it, absolutely. And in Canada, for example, we have, I think, a pretty reasonable approach to these things. We haven't heard, or I haven't heard personally, about cases like this happening here as dramatically. I know they have been. I know you're going to see areas where it is a little bit ambiguous, but in Canada, you have a 5-year grace period. So if you're 15 years old, you can still have sex with someone who's 20 years old, theoretically. If you're 14, 19. If you're 12 and 13, there's a shorter window. I think the limit is 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. And some people may disagree with that, but you're still not having this line where a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old are that dramatically different from one another. And I find it to be really, really bizarre, and certainly something that needs to change, that you cannot use it in court in the state of Michigan if someone lies about your age. So I mentioned, that I posted this on social media. A friend of mine named Jordan had commented on this, and he said, so what are you supposed to do? Okay, I need 2 pieces of ID, photocopied front and back. Going to send it to the lawyer, and, if he clears us in 4 to 6 weeks, then yeah, we'll have sex. Is that basically where they want the courtship process to go to? Because if so, I certainly think that would be a positive step, at least in terms of indemnifying people. I saw a comment from someone else on this saying, I'm glad I don't have sons. And I find it fascinating that the system itself has created such a real sense of victimization and victimhood amongst men. Not only are men dealing with false accusations on things and guilty until proven innocent attitudes. I mean, look at, for crying out loud, Columbia University. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. By the way, the accuser at Columbia University has now released a sex tape to protest the accusations dismissal by the university. I mean, that's a story for another show. But there are false accusations where the response is guilty until proven innocent. But even then, even if there's consent, no victimhood, no victimization, no accusation of wrongdoing. And a guy is on the sex offender registry until he turns, just get this, until he turns 44. Is that really, so that's going to school, that's entering the workforce, not the time of your life, if any. I mean, not that there is a good time, that you should have to be dealing with this for doing absolutely nothing legally wrong, if the law made any sense. We've got to take a break here. When we come back, more of Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. Stay tuned, Canada. Be right back.
You're listening to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton, exclusively on TheRebel.media.
Well, we are back on Lawton Online, and I must say, the big battle going on, I know I mentioned earlier, it's the transgender movement, the gender fluidity movement. No. The big battle today is the war on smoking and the war on smokers. And I say this as an ally. I am not myself a smoker of cigarettes, nor of, the Justin Trudeau's drug of choice, marijuana. There we go. Not a smoker of that, never have been. Focusing specifically in this segment on cigarettes. I have, smoked the odd cigar and enjoy it, but that's about it. Not a smoker. I am an ally to the fight. I understand and feel bad for the plight that smokers face in 2015. And I know it's a little bit odd for, I think, people in general to talk about smoking as though there is sort of some mass discrimination against them, but there is. I mean, this is a group that offers a great deal to the tax base, offers a great deal to the general public. This is a group that puts millions of dollars, billions of dollars a year into healthcare and education for others, for people like you and I, the non-smokers among us. Yet it's a group that is consistently told to butt out, but still being asked to buy the stuff, basically. Well, a recent comment or column in the Toronto Sun and the Sun Media papers by a former communications director for Dalton McGuinty, former Premier of Ontario, has, I think, shown a little bit of concern for, or should show concern to people, for what it says about our own freedoms and liberties. Jim Warren, once the communications director for who I would say is Ontario's worst premier, penned a piece saying quite unequivocally, it's time to ban smoking. Cue dramatic music. I don't think we have dramatic music. If we did, I'd play it there. He says, quote, I was a pack-a-day smoker from the time I was 16 until the time I was 30. Quitting smoking was the most difficult thing I've ever done. I tried many times and failed. When I quit for good, it was a result of several factors. The birth of my daughter, the support of family and friends, and the growing public awareness of the health risk. But the final thing that helped me quit was the ban on smoking in restaurants and bars in Toronto. I quit for good on June 13th, 2001. And in my view, the time has come to debate the merits of banning smoking tobacco in Canada. Unquote. Okay, here we go, Jimmy. Let's start off on a couple of things. You've said, and only a liberal would say or think this, that the biggest factor and the biggest priority in you quitting smoking was not your family, was not your health, was not what your wife wanted, was not what your kids wanted. It was a government policy. So you believe in your own life that government responsibility is more important than personal responsibility. You believe that the government has a responsibility to you to make decisions on your behalf. Well, that right there tells us all we need to know about you. And he cites the case that I think I talked about on the show a couple of weeks ago, which was a Quebec judge awarding $15 billion to Quebec smokers in a ruling against cigarette companies. And he talks about the fact that in that lawsuit, a judge decided, and well, we know from earlier on in the show what happens when a judge can unilaterally decide something, that the companies earned billions of dollars at the expense of the lungs, the throats, and the general well-being of their customers. And he talks about the billions of dollars the government rules and says this. And this is, I think, the most important quote from this, the most important takeaway from his column, is that the reality is, and these are his words, the cost to society of smoking is greater than any tax we collect. And I don't quite buy that. You know, I don't buy the argument that smoking should be kept legal because of the tax benefits either. I take the argument that smoking should be legal because it doesn't bother me what someone else does. It doesn't bother me what decisions someone else makes, what substances someone else decides to ingest. You could argue there is a slight public safety component when you start talking about things like secondhand smoke, but many of these things are already mitigated in legislation that I would argue in many cases is already a bit too overzealous. But you take someone and put them in their own living room, have them light up a cigarette. Am I suffering from that? Absolutely not. And then the argument from the left always comes back to one factor, which is, well, what about healthcare? Well, what about it? It's not my fault the system is a socialist one. It's not my fault that the system does not force people with unhealthy behaviors to go to the back of the line or to pay more. It's not my fault that the system sucks. We can't use the healthcare system and the fact that it is inherently socialist as an excuse to not move forward with other changes or not resist other changes. We don't charge smokers more for healthcare, nor should we. I mean, we charge them more in the form of taxes that keep going up on cigarettes, but the reason we don't is because we recognize that in our society, we've determined for whatever reason that your personal lifestyle has nothing to do with your healthcare. Otherwise, we'd move ahead with fat taxes. Oh, wait, Ontario thought about doing that. Oh, wait, why don't we charge drivers more for healthcare? If you drive and you're going over the speed limit, why don't we charge you if you get into a health collision more for your surgery? You crack your head open, you weren't wearing a helmet, great, we'll charge you more. We don't make these decisions as society. I would argue the answer to all those problems is very simple, and is what we were talking about earlier. Make healthcare and health insurance a private issue that people need to deal with on their own rather than a government issue. But I digress. No, the reality is of this, smoking is an act, it's a behavior. I think given what we know about it, it's not the brightest, but people still get to make that decision for themselves. And I don't care. I don't care. I've been walking down the sidewalk and I've had smoke blown in my face before, not intentionally, usually. And I think, okay, I don't particularly enjoy that. But it's gone in a second. And I'm going to get back to smoking. What I find hilarious now is that the city of Calgary City Council is on the 29th of this month, on June 29th, going to be debating a motion that passed in committee to have e-cigarettes banned anywhere that smoking's banned, as though having water vapor blown is somehow the same as the scenario that I just described, which is someone actually blowing cigarette smoke, which does have negative health benefits in your face. And this is what I mean when we talk about the war on smoking. Because now a cessation aid, something that people use to quit smoking, is apparently just as bad as smoking in the absence of any evidence that actually suggests that. So I think right from the get-go, we can talk about the fact that government is doing a bit of doublespeak about it. And Jim Warren, not a representative of government anymore, but he's a representative of a party and of an ideology, I think. And to be honest, as much as I am unequivocally opposed to banning smoking, and I have no medical reason for this opinion, by the way. I have no legitimate reason. I cannot say because the smoking science is flawed. I cannot say because the number of people that get lung cancer from smoking is wrong. I cannot say any of those things. I can say that anyone who smokes knows the risks. Anyone who smokes knows what they're doing. For whatever reason, they enjoy it. The benefit to them outweighs the obvious negatives. Their call, not mine. My argument is one that solely exists in the realm of individual choice and personal responsibility and nowhere else. And some people may say that's a cop-out, but look, if you think freedom's a cop-out, that's your problem, not mine. So I think from this point of view, I'm against it because, not because I agree with smoking, but because I deplore the idea of telling someone else what they can't do, especially when there are myriad other activities that are harmful and legal. For example, road racing, swimming. Here are things that you can do that are completely fine legally. I mean, depending on where your road race and how fast you go, I guess. But they can harm you. They can injure you. They could kill you. Scuba diving. Swimming with dolphins. Oh, those cagey things. You never know what they're going to do. Doing jumping jacks. I'm sure someone's broken an ankle doing that. Where do we draw the line? Where do we draw the line at which point on one side your habit or hobby or adventure-seeking thrill, whatever it is harmful enough to the point where we're going to ban it? At what point is that? And as much as I agree with that, as much as I think that banning smoking is a bad idea, there's a part of me that thinks deep down how I'd love to see a government push it. And the reason is because at least I could respect their principles. Because what government is doing now is trying to say that it's incrementally moving towards it, but actually trying to manipulate things into which people will still be able to buy cigarettes but not smoke them anywhere. Give it 5 years, and the laws across Canada will basically be, especially in Ontario, that you can't smoke anywhere but in, like, a 3 square foot section of your closet on the rear end of your house, as long as you live in a neighborhood that's not, one with a school and you're, 5 kilometers away from the nearest stop sign, because that means you're in a remote enough area. That's basically where we're headed with this. But they know that no matter how restrictive are the rules, people are still going to buy cigarettes, people are still going to smoke, and that's why they can keep unequivocally and unilaterally saying, we're going to raise up the cost. Because you know what? If you have a hole in your budget, if you have what Kathleen Wynne said a few months ago was revenue leakage, you can always count on getting money from the smokers. No different than lottery tickets and casinos. It's getting money off the backs of someone with an addiction or someone with a hobby that society has deemed is apparently sinful. Whatever the motivation is, that's not government's role. So from a practical point of view, government can't ban smoking because you know what? People are just going to drive right on down to the reserve and get illegal cigarettes anyway. But from a fundamental view, why should they? Even if they could, even if government could snap its fingers overnight and get rid of smoking, what good would that serve? I think people have a fundamental desire to seek a vice, whatever that vice is, whether the vice is smoking, whether it's alcohol, which I think in some cases it can be more harmful than alcohol, because you can smoke and drive and not kill anyone, but you drink and drive and there's a good chance you or someone else is ending up dead. People are always going to find a vice to replace it. So why is it government's role to make sure that can't happen? Why is it government's role to take that away from you? You as a free individual have the right to do that. And, I wanted to read from a piece on TheRebel.media's Megaphone by Richard Anderson, writing about Jim Warren's piece, which he characterizes as Warren wanting to take the nanny state to the next level, which is incredibly accurate. Anderson writes about Warren. He breezily dismisses the possible emergence of a huge black market in contraband cigarettes. Apparently, he doesn't think this is a big deal because a black market already exists. Anderson also writes, it's been known for decades that smoking is bad for your health. We don't need a former McGinty flack to tell us that. What's remarkable is the instinct so many modern liberals have for banning what they don't like, unquote. And there we have, I think, the fundamental problem of the liberal ethos here, is that they think a lack of familiarity is justification for a ban. Look at what Calgary is doing with e-cigarettes, and Ontario is moving forward with similar restrictions in a bill that will also put mandatory calorie counts on restaurant menus. It was passed. It hasn't gone into effect just yet, though. But Ontario and Alberta, the latter of which, by the way, has also banned menthol cigarettes. Not all cigarettes, just menthols, because they say that's the ones teenagers are going to use. Well, great, now teenagers are going to use, normal cigarettes. But that's all aside from the point here, because what the governments are doing is banning what they don't like. With e-cigarettes, what they're doing is banning what they don't know. There is no conclusive science one way or another that says e-cigarettes are harmful for your health or not harmful for your health, nor that secondhand vapor is bad for your health, nor not bad for your health. Yet still, though Health Canada does not yet have enough evidence to move ahead with it, the government's saying, well, we're going to ban now until we hear otherwise. Ban now, ask questions later. That's the liberal ideology summed up into one nice little package with a pretty Dalton McGuinty painted bow right there. You know, that's the most embarrassing part of this, is that it's about 10 years late to the party, I think. The science on cigarettes has not evolved in the last 10 years. We don't really know anything more now than we did 10 years ago. So why now? It's just because now that Warren no longer smokes. Well, now he can justify moving ahead with this. You know, now it's something that he doesn't like. Well, what about people that still enjoy it? You know, there's no one as self-righteous as an ex-smoker. That's the thing. And don't get me wrong, good for you. Good for you. I'm proud of you. Good for you for quitting it. But they're the worst of all because they think that everyone else should do it just because they did. Well, there was a time when they didn't either, and that seems to be the category in which Warren himself is falling here. We got to take a break. Coming up, the final few moments of Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
It's time for It Must Be a Liberal, only on Lawton Online. Scouring every corner of the globe for stories so outrageous, there must be a liberal involved.
Yes, you heard the man. It's time for It Must Be a Liberal, scouring every corner of the globe, finding the stories so outrageous there must be a liberal involved here on Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. Yes, we scour the corners of the globe. We go from Hawaii to Herzegovina. We go from Sierra Leone to Sri Lanka. And, of course, from Windsor Castle to, well, Windsor, Ontario, finding all of these things delivered to you. And we actually don't have to go much further than Waterloo today, where when students return to school in September, they'll have the opportunity to take a new course at the University of Waterloo. The course is called Gender and Performance. But it's about one particular person and one particular person's album, and that is Beyoncé. Now you're wondering, is that the person or the album? That's both. It's about Beyoncé and her latest album, Beyoncé. Yes. If you're sending your child to the University of Waterloo, this is what you're paying for. Beyoncé, the wife of Jay-Z. Beyoncé, the Destiny's Child hitmaker. Beyoncé, the woman who graced the stage of the Super Bowl for the halftime show. I think it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago. That Beyoncé. And Nayla Kalita May, the professor, says that Beyoncé is making feminism mainstream. I'm pretty sure that's been done for a few decades before her. She says that it's worth studying. She talks about some of the artist's songs. She talks about some of her dance moves. She says, for those who may scoff at the notion of making Put a Ring on It, hitmaker, subject of a scholarly study, Kalita May said Beyoncé is a natural fit for disciplines like gender studies or sociology. Quote, just as we would study T.S. Eliot or Shakespeare, unquote. She called Beyoncé's impact on modern culture undeniable. It's about being relevant, and it's about being connected, she said. Okay, yeah, I can't deny Beyoncé's relevance. You know, I think there are lots of things that are relevant. Like I saw a video on YouTube the other day of a cat riding a turtle. That was very relevant. That doesn't mean we should have a whole class around it. I'm pretty sure the author that penned To Be or Not to Be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind. You know, I'm pretty sure that is a little bit more advanced and worthy of study than Put a Ring on It. But you know what? Who am I to say? Apparently, if you go to university now, you get to just study this nonsense. I think it's safe to say when you draft an entire course around an album by Beyoncé, it's safe to say you must be a liberal. There's no other explanation for it. We got to wrap things up for the show today, but I want to thank Dr. Brian Day for coming on. We'll be back next week with more of the most irreverent, hard-hitting analysis in any corner of the internet here on Lawton Online, only on TheRebel.media. I'm Andrew Lawton. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Lawton Online. Check out TheRebel.media for lots more fearless content and commentary.